Hello there, and welcome to a question that reaches across the deepest corridors of human memory. Tonight, we're going to explore something that challenges everything we think we know about the beginning of civilization, the origin of our gods, and perhaps even the true history of intelligence on this planet. What if the gods of ancient mythology weren't divine beings at all, but survivors? Survivors of Earth's first great civilization, one that rose to incredible heights before being swept away by cataclysm so complete that only fragments of their story remain, encoded in the myths we still tell today. Or perhaps something even more extraordinary. What if these beings, who walked among our ancestors, teaching them the arts of civilization, weren't from this world at all? The thumbnail you clicked on shows figures that look almost human, yet not quite. Elongated features, eyes that seem to hold knowledge spanning millennia, robes that speak of authority beyond mortal understanding. And that spiral symbol one of them holds, that same spiral appears in cultures across the globe, from the ancient Celtic Druids to the shamans of the Americas, from Egyptian hieroglyphs to Mesopotamian cylinder seals, always representing the same concepts: knowledge, time, the cosmic order itself. Tonight, we're going to follow that spiral down through layers of history most people never think to question. We'll walk through the ruins of civilizations that shouldn't exist according to our timeline. We'll examine the strange consistency of flood myths that span every continent, every culture, as if humanity shares a collective memory of something that happened to all of us, all at once. And we'll look at the beings ancient peoples described with such vivid detail, beings they called gods, but who might have been something else entirely. Because here's what's fascinating. When you strip away the supernatural elements from ancient mythology, when you look at what these so-called gods actually did, you don't find magic. You find technology. You find advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and engineering. You find beings who came from across the waters or down from the sky, who taught primitive humans how to build, how to farm, how to organize society, and then vanished, leaving behind monuments that still baffle our engineers today. The ancient Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, beings who came from the sky and established the first cities. The Egyptians revered Thoth, who gave them writing and the measurement of time. The Maya told of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who brought civilization from across the eastern sea. The Hindus described the Nagas, serpent beings of who live incredible wisdom beneath the earth to guide humanity. Different and occasionally emerge names, different cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. Yet the stories are remarkably consistent. Advanced beings, often described as tall, pale, with elongated features and unusual eyes. Beings who possessed a knowledge that seemed impossible for the time periods in which they appeared. Beings who built monuments aligned with celestial bodies, with precision that suggests they understood astronomy better than we did just a few centuries ago. But what if these weren't gods at all? What if they were refugees? Imagine for a moment that our understanding of human history is fundamentally incomplete. We're taught that civilization began around 10,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution. Cities, writing, complex societies, all emerging relatively recently in the grand timeline of human existence. But what if that timeline is wrong? What if civilization rose before, achieved heights we can barely imagine, and then fell so catastrophically that almost every trace was erased. The geological evidence is there if you know where to look. Around 12,800 years ago, something happened to our planet. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas impact event. Massive cosmic impacts, possibly from a fragmenting comet, struck the Earth. The results were catastrophic. Sudden climate change, mass extinctions, and global flooding as ice sheets melted rapidly. Entire continents were reshaped. Sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, swallowing coastal regions where if any ancient civilization existed, they would most likely have built their cities. This wasn't just a regional disaster. This was a planetary reset button. And yet, scattered across the world, we find evidence that suggests someone survived, someone with knowledge, with technology, with the ability to preserve and pass on information about the world that was lost. Take Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built over 11,000 years ago by people who supposedly hadn't even invented agriculture yet. Massive stone pillars, precisely carved, arranged in complex patterns that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of astronomy and engineering. The official explanation is that hunter gatherers somehow organized themselves to create this monument, then buried it deliberately and away. But what if the builders they walk weren't primitive hunter gatherers at all? What if they were the last remnants far more advanced? Errants of something considered the antediluvian traditions found in cultures worldwide. Antediluvian means before the flood, and these traditions speak of a golden age of humanity, a time when knowledge was vast and civilization reached heights that were never again achieved. The Babylonians preserved king lists that spoke of rulers who reigned for thousands of years before the flood came. The Egyptians that had their Zeb Tepi, the first time when the gods ruled directly on earth. The Hindus described the Satya Yuga, a golden age of truth and perfection that ended in catastrophe. These aren't just mythological constructs. These are cultural memories passed down through generations of something that actually happened. The details have been mythologized, certainly, but the core remains consistent. There was a time before our time. There was a civilization before our civilization, and it ended in flood and fire and darkness. But here's where it gets really interesting. The beings described as surviving this catastrophe, the ones who became the foundation for our god myths, they don't sound entirely human. Oh, they're humanoid, certainly. Bipedal, intelligent, capable of interbreeding with humans in many of the stories. But there are consistent differences described across cultures that had no contact with each other. The elongated skulls, the unusual height, the pale skin that seemed to glow, the eyes that were larger than normal, often described as luminous or piercing. The extended sometimes described lifespans as immortality, the ability to fly great or travel distances instantly, the profound knowledge of sciences and arts that primitive humans couldn't possibly have developed on their own. Now, we could dismiss of this as primitive all people trying to make sense of natural phenomena they didn't understand. Lightning becomes Zeus, hurling thunderbolts. Earthquakes become Poseidon's anger. The sun becomes Ra's daily journey across the sky. But that explanation falls apart when you look at the technical knowledge these gods supposedly possessed and passed on. The Sumerian god Ea, also known as Enki, taught humans irrigation, metallurgy, and the domestication of animals. Thoth gave the Egyptians mathematics, writing in the calendar. Quetzalcoatl taught the Mesoamericans astronomy and agriculture. Oannes, the fish god of Mesopotamia, emerged from the Persian Gulf each day to teach humans the arts of civilization, then returned to the depths each night. These aren't explanations for natural phenomena. These are descriptions of technology transfer, advanced beings sharing knowledge with primitive humans. The question is, were these beings the survivors of Earth's first great civilization, or were they something else entirely? Because there's another possibility we need to consider. What if the first advanced civilization on Earth wasn't human at all? What if intelligence evolved here before, in forms we don't recognize, and what our ancestors encountered weren't human survivors, but the remnants of something alien? The fossil record is incomplete. We know this. Vast stretches of Earth's history remain mysterious, and soft bodied organisms leave few traces. If intelligence had evolved in the oceans, for instance, in forms that didn't require the kind of technology that leaves archaeological evidence, we might never know they existed. But if such beings had achieved advanced knowledge of science and mathematics, if they had learned to manipulate their environment in ways that didn't require metal and stone, they could have reached incredible heights while leaving almost no trace of their existence. And then, when catastrophe struck, when the cosmic impacts of 12,800 years ago reshaped the planet, perhaps a few survived. Perhaps they emerged from their deep refuges to find a world transformed and primitive humans struggling to survive in the aftermath. Perhaps, out of compassion or necessity, they began to teach these humans, to guide them, to help them rebuild some semblance of civilization. To the humans, these beings would have seemed godlike. Their knowledge would have appeared magical. Their technology, no matter how subtle or organic, would have seemed miraculous. And so they were remembered as gods, worshipped as gods, but never truly understood as what they might actually have been. This would explain so much about the consistency of ancient mythology, why cultures across the globe, with no contact between them, developed such similar stories about civilizing gods, why these gods are always described with such specific physical characteristics, why they're said to have come from the skies or from across the waters, places that were unreachable to ancient humans, why they taught specific technologies and then vanished, leaving behind monuments and knowledge that seem impossible for their supposed time periods. The spiral symbol appears again and again in these contexts. In Celtic mythology, it represents the journey between worlds. In Hinduism, it symbolizes the cosmic cycles of creation and destruction. In Native American traditions, it shows the path of spiritual development. In ancient Egypt, it was associated with Thoth and the measurement of time itself. What if this symbol isn't metaphorical? What if it represents actual knowledge about the nature of time, about cycles of civilization rising and falling? What if it's a map, a guide, a warning left behind by beings who understood that what happened once would happen again? The more we dig into ancient history, the more we find evidence that doesn't fit our neat timeline of human development. Artifacts that seem too sophisticated for their supposed age. Knowledge that appears too advanced for the cultures that possessed it. Monuments that demonstrate engineering capabilities that we're only beginning to understand today. Under the waters off the coast of Japan lies Yonaguni, a massive stone structure that appears to be artificial, yet it was submerged when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Off the coast of India, marine archaeologists have discovered ruins that could be over 12,000 years old. In the Mediterranean, entire cities lie beneath the waves, cities that were above water when the Ice Age ended and the Great Melting began. These aren't natural formations. These are the remains of something that was built, something that was inhabited, something that was lost when the waters rose and the world changed. And if there are ruins underwater, ruins that predate our supposed beginning of civilization, then someone was building before we thought anyone could build. Someone was creating complex societies before we believed complex societies were possible. The question that haunts every archaeological discovery, every ancient text, every mythological tradition is always the same. Who were they? Who were these beings that ancient humans remembered so vividly, described so consistently, and revered so completely that their stories became the foundation of every religion, every cultural tradition, every attempt to understand our place in the cosmos? Were they us? Were they the survivors of humanity's first attempt at civilization, beings who had achieved the knowledge and technology that we've spent the last 12,000 years trying to rediscover? Were they the remnants of Atlantis, not the fictional island of Plato's imagination, but a real civilization that reached heights we can barely comprehend before being swept away by cosmic catastrophe? Or were they something else entirely? Were they visitors from another world, refugees from their own planetary catastrophe, who found shelter on a young Earth and lived here long enough to be remembered in our myths? Were they an alien species that evolved intelligence before humanity even existed, beings who watched over our development and guided our first steps toward civilization? The elongated skulls found in archaeological sites around the world suggest human variation. The something beyond normal Paracas skulls of Peru, the cone heads of Egypt, the elongated remains found in various European sites all share characteristics that seem to indicate a distinct genetic lineage. Modern DNA analysis has revealed anomalies in some of these remains, genetic markers that don't match any known human populations. These beings, whatever they were, left their mark not just in our mythology, but in our very genetics. Many ancient texts speak of the gods interbreeding with humans, creating hybrid offspring who possessed some of their advanced capabilities, but were still fundamentally human. The Nephilim of Hebrew tradition, the Titans of Greek mythology, the giant kings of various ancient cultures, all described as the children of gods and humans. What if these stories aren't metaphorical? What if they're genealogical records? What if some portion of humanity carries genetic markers from these ancient beings, diluted through thousands of generations, but still present, still occasionally manifesting in individuals who seem to possess knowledge or capabilities that can't be easily explained? The shamans and mystics of ancient cultures often claimed direct descent from the gods. They were the keepers of ancient knowledge, the ones who could communicate with the divine, the bridges between the human world and the realm of the gods. In many traditions, this knowledge was passed down through specific bloodlines, from teacher to student, from parent to child, as if certain genetic markers were necessary to access and understand the deeper mysteries. As we continue our journey into this mystery, we'll explore these bloodlines, these genetic threads that might connect us directly to Earth's first civilization. We'll examine the monuments they left behind, the knowledge they preserved, and the warnings they may have encoded for future generations who would face the same cosmic cycles that destroyed their world. Because the spiral symbol that appears in the thumbnail isn't just decorative, it's a message, a reminder that time moves in cycles, that what has happened before will happen again, and that somewhere in our deepest memories, in our myths and dreams and genetic code, we carry the knowledge of those who came before. The ancient Egyptians had a word for it, Zepetepi, the first time. Not the beginning civilization, but the time of their before their civilization, when the gods walked the earth directly, when knowledge flowed like water, and when the impossible was commonplace. They spoke of it not as mythology, but as history, real events that happened to real beings in a real world that no longer existed. And they weren't alone in this memory. The Babylonians preserved detailed records of kings who ruled for thousands of years before the Great Flood. Not symbolic kings, not mythological figures, but actual rulers with names, dynasties, and documented achievements. The Sumerian king list speaks of 8 kings who reigned for a total of 241,200 years before the flood swept everything away. After the flood, it notes, the kingship had to be lowered from heaven once again. Lowered from heaven. Not established by human effort, not evolved through natural progression, but restored by divine intervention. As if civilization itself was a gift that had been given before, lost in catastrophe, and needed to be given again. The Hindu Puranas describe the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, when humans lived for thousands of years and possessed knowledge that encompassed all of creation. The Vedic texts speak of flying vehicles called vimanas, of weapons that could destroy entire armies, of communication across vast distances, of beings who could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Modern scholars dismiss these as the fantasies of primitive minds. But what if they were technical manuals, instruction guides for technologies that once existed but were lost when the world ended in fire and flood? The pattern repeats everywhere you look. The Celtic Druids spoke of the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, who came from 4 magical cities in the north and brought with them 4 treasures that granted mastery over the elements. The Native Americans remember the Star People, beings who came from the sky and taught them astronomy, agriculture, and the sacred ways. The Aboriginal Australians preserve stories of the dream time when the ancestors walked the land and shaped the world with their knowledge and power. Different names, different cultures, different continents, but always the same core elements. Advanced beings who possessed knowledge far beyond what should have been possible for their time. Beings who taught primitive humans the foundations of civilization. Beings who came from somewhere else, whether that somewhere was the sky, the sea, or simply an earlier time that has been forgotten. But here's what makes these stories more than just mythology. The knowledge they describe isn't random or fantastical. It's specific, technical, and accurate in ways that shouldn't have been possible for ancient peoples to know. The Dogon people of Mali, living in one of the most isolated regions of Africa, preserved for centuries detailed knowledge about Sirius B, a white dwarf star that orbits the bright star Sirius. They knew its orbital period. They knew it was incredibly dense. They knew it was white hot, and they knew it was invisible to the naked eye. Modern astronomy didn't discover Sirius B until 1862 and didn't confirm its properties until well into the 20th century. Yet the Dogon claim this knowledge came to them from the Nomo, fish-like beings, who came from the Sirius system in ancient times to teach humanity. The ancient Maya developed a calendar system so precise that it rivals our modern atomic the length clocks. They calculate of the solar year to within 17 seconds of our current measurements. They predicted eclipses thousands of years in advance. They mapped the movements of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter with mathematical precision that suggests they had instruments and knowledge that shouldn't have existed in pre-Columbian America. Yet they attributed all of this knowledge to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, who came from across the eastern waters to teach them the secrets of the cosmos. The builders of the Great Pyramid encoded into its dimensions mathematical constants that weren't discovered by modern science until the 18th and 19th centuries. The ratio of pi, the golden ratio, the speed of light in meters per second, the precise length of the solar year, the distance from the Earth to the Sun. These aren't coincidences. These are signatures, messages encoded in stone by builders who possessed a knowledge that we're only beginning to rediscover. And then there's the precision of the construction itself. The Great Pyramid contains over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 15 tons, fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters. The entire structure is aligned to true north within 3/60 of a degree, more accurate than the Greenwich Observatory. The foundation is level to within just 2.1 centimeters across a base that covers over 13 acres. Modern engineers, with all our advanced machinery and computer-aided design, would struggle to match this level of precision. Yet we're told it was built by a Bronze Age civilization using copper tools and wooden ramps. The official explanation requires us to believe that people who hadn't invented the wheel somehow moved multi-ton stones with perfect accuracy across hundreds of miles of desert terrain. But what if the builders weren't Bronze Age primitives at all? What if they were the inheritors of knowledge from an earlier, more advanced civilization? What if the pyramid wasn't built by the Egyptians, but for them, by beings who possessed the technology and knowledge necessary to create such a marvel? The Egyptian texts themselves suggest this possibility. They speak of the pyramid as having been built during Zep-Tepi, the first time, by the Netru, the godlike beings who ruled Egypt before the pharaohs. The texts describe these beings as tall, pale-skinned, with elongated skulls and unusual eyes. They came from Ta-Ur, the distant land, and possessed a knowledge of the heavens and the earth that allowed them to perform what seemed like miracles. Sound familiar? Because these same descriptions appear in cultures around the world, always associated with the beings who brought civilization and knowledge to primitive humanity. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki with almost identical physical characteristics: tall, pale, with elongated features and luminous eyes. They came from Nibiru, a distant world, and possessed knowledge of genetics, metallurgy, astronomy, and engineering that they shared with early humans. The cuneiform tablets don't describe them as gods in the supernatural sense, but as flesh and blood beings with advanced technology that appeared magical to primitive observers. Enki, whom the Sumerians credited with creating modern humanity, is described in the texts not as a divine creator, but as a genetic engineer. The tablets speak of him mixing the clay of primitive humans with the essence of the Anunnaki to create a hybrid species capable of higher intelligence and complex thought. Modern geneticists reading these ancient texts find descriptions of procedures that sound remarkably like genetic manipulation techniques that we've only recently developed ourselves. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written stories in human history, describes advanced technologies that shouldn't have existed when it was written. Gilgamesh encounters beings who can fly through the air, weapons that can level mountains, and devices that can extend human life far beyond its natural span. The story treats these not as fantasy, but as historical fact, as real technologies possessed by real beings who lived in a real world that existed before the flood changed everything. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from genetics itself. Recent advances in DNA analysis have revealed something extraordinary about human evolution. Around 200,000 years ago, something happened to our species that has no parallel in the evolutionary record. Human brain size increased dramatically, our cognitive abilities exploded, and we developed capabilities that far exceed anything necessary for basic survival. The standard evolutionary explanation is that random mutations and natural selection gradually produce these changes over thousands of generations. But the genetic evidence suggests something different. The changes appear to have happened relatively quickly in evolutionary terms, and they affected multiple human populations simultaneously across different continents. More puzzling still, modern humans possess genetic markers that don't appear in any other primate species. Sequences of DNA that seem to have been inserted into our genome rather than evolved naturally. Some geneticists have suggested that these anomalous sequences might represent evidence of ancient genetic manipulation of someone or something deliberately modifying human DNA to enhance our cognitive abilities. The Sumerian creation myths describe exactly such a process. Enki taking the primitive humans that already existed and enhancing them with genetic material from the Anunnaki. The result, according to the texts, was a hybrid species that possessed some of the advanced capabilities of the gods but remained fundamentally human. Could these ancient stories be describing real events? Could the beings our ancestors remembered as gods have been genetic engineers who modified early human DNA to create the modern human species? It would explain why human intelligence developed so rapidly and why we possess capabilities that seem far beyond what natural selection would require. It would also explain why certain bloodlines throughout history have seemed to possess knowledge and abilities that set them apart from the general population. The pharaohs of Egypt, the priest kings of Mesopotamia, the sacred bloodlines of various cultures around the world all claimed direct descent from the gods. What if these claims weren't metaphorical but genealogical? What if certain families really did carry genetic markers that traced back to the original genetic modifications performed by our mysterious benefactors? The elongated skulls found in archaeological sites around the world might represent physical evidence of these bloodlines. The Paracas skulls of Peru, with their unusual size and shape, contain DNA that doesn't match any known human population. The cranial volume is up to 25% larger than normal human skulls, and the bone structure shows differences that suggest they represent a distinct genetic lineage. Similar skulls have been found in Egypt, particularly among the remains of the Amarna period, when Akhenaten ruled and established a new capital dedicated to the worship of a single god. Akhenaten himself is depicted in Egyptian art with an elongated skull, an unusual body shape, and features that seem almost alien. His wife, Nefertiti, and their children are shown with similar characteristics. The official explanation is that these represent artistic stylization or medical conditions like hydrocephalus, but the consistency of the depictions, the fact that they appear in realistic rather than stylized artwork, and the discovery of actual skulls with similar characteristics suggests something more significant. What if Akhenaten and his family represented a bloodline that carried more of the original genetic modifications than the general population? What if their unusual appearance and their revolutionary religious ideas reflected knowledge and perspectives inherited from the beings who first enhanced human DNA? The religious revolution that Akhenaten instituted is itself mysterious. He abandoned the traditional Egyptian pantheon and established the worship of Aten, a solar deity depicted as a disk with rays ending in hands. This wasn't just a change in religious preference, it represented a fundamental shift in understanding about the nature of divinity and the cosmos. Akhenaten's hymn to Aten contains concepts that wouldn't become common in human religion for thousands of years. The idea of a single, universal deity. The concept that this deity was present in all things rather than localized to specific places or objects. The understanding that the sun was the source of all life on Earth and that its energy powered the entire ecosystem. These ideas were so advanced, so far ahead of their time, that they were quickly suppressed after Akhenaten's death. The traditional priesthood restored the old gods, destroyed Akhenaten's capital, and tried to erase his revolution from history. But the knowledge didn't disappear completely. It went underground, preserved by secret societies and mystery schools that would eventually give birth to the philosophical traditions of Greece, the mystical practices of various esoteric traditions, and perhaps even the monotheistic religions that would reshape human civilization. The mystery schools themselves represent another thread connecting us to the knowledge of the first civilization. From the Egyptian mysteries of Isis and Osiris to the Greek mysteries of Dionysus and Demeter, from the Roman mysteries of Mithras to the Celtic mysteries of the Druids, these secret traditions all claimed to preserve knowledge from the earliest times, knowledge that had been given to humanity by divine beings in the distant past. The initiation ceremonies of these schools often involved symbolic death and rebirth, representing the destruction of the old world and the emergence of the new. Initiates were taught that they were receiving knowledge that had been lost in a great catastrophe and preserved by a small group of survivors who passed it down through carefully guarded lineages. The symbolism used in these traditions is remarkably consistent across cultures and time periods. The spiral appears everywhere, representing the cycles of time, the path of spiritual development, and the structure of the cosmos itself. The eye representing consciousness and divine sight. The serpent representing wisdom and the Kundalini force that awakens higher consciousness. The tree, representing the axis that connects earth and heaven, the human and the divine. These weren't just decorative symbols, they were technical diagrams, maps of consciousness and reality that encoded profound truths about the nature of existence. The beings who first taught these symbols to humanity understood something about consciousness, about the structure of reality, about the relationship between mind and matter that we're only beginning to rediscover through quantum physics and consciousness research. The spiral, in particular, appears to be much more than a simple geometric form. It represents the golden ratio, the mathematical constant that appears throughout nature in the structure of galaxies, the shells of mollusks, the arrangement of leaves on plants, and the proportions of the human body. It describes the path of energy through space-time, the structure of DNA, and the pattern of consciousness as it evolves through different levels of awareness. Modern physics has discovered that space-time itself has a spiral structure at the quantum level. The fabric of reality curves and twists in patterns that match the ancient spiral symbols found in cultures around the world. Could these symbols represent actual knowledge about the fundamental structure of the universe? Could the beings who taught them to humanity have possessed a science that understood reality at levels we're only now beginning to approach? The more we examine the evidence, the more it suggests that our ancestors weren't primitive at all. They were the inheritors of a knowledge tradition that stretched back to the very beginning of human civilization and possibly beyond. The beings they remembered as gods weren't supernatural entities, but real beings with real knowledge who lived in a real world that existed before our current cycle of civilization began. But this raises the most important question of all. If these beings really existed, if they really possessed advanced knowledge and technology, if they really guided the development of human civilization, then where did they come from? Were they the survivors of Earth's first great civilization, a human society that reached incredible heights before being destroyed by cosmic catastrophe? Or were they something else entirely, visitors from another world who found refuge on Earth and chose to guide our development? The answer might lie in the cosmic cycles themselves, in the pattern of catastrophes that seem to reset civilization on Earth at regular intervals. Because the Younger Dryas impact event that ended the last ice age wasn't unique. The geological record shows evidence of similar cosmic impacts throughout Earth's history, events that caused mass extinctions, climate changes, and the collapse of whatever civilizations might have existed at the time. The Deccan Traps in India show evidence of massive volcanic activity triggered by cosmic impacts 66 million years ago. The Chicxulub crater in Mexico marks the impact that ended the age of dinosaurs. The Sudbury Basin in Canada preserves evidence of an even earlier impact that reshaped the entire planet. These weren't random events. They represent a pattern, a cycle of cosmic catastrophes that regularly devastate Earth and force life to begin again. Ancient cultures around the world preserved knowledge of these cycles. The Hindu concept of the yugas describes repeating ages of civilization that rise and fall in predictable patterns. The Maya long count calendar tracked vast cycles of time that encompassed multiple rises and falls of civilization. The Egyptian texts speak of the phoenix, the mythical bird that burns itself to ash and rises again as a symbol of the eternal cycle of destruction and renewal. What if these weren't just philosophical concepts, but actual historical records? What if the beings our ancestors remembered as gods were the survivors not just of the most recent catastrophe, but of multiple catastrophes stretching back millions of years? What if intelligence has evolved on Earth many times, reaching great heights before being knocked back to primitive levels by cosmic impacts, only to slowly rebuild and evolve again? In this scenario, the gods of human mythology would represent the accumulated wisdom of countless previous civilizations, beings who had learned to survive the cosmic cycles, who had developed technologies and knowledge systems that could endure through the dark ages between civilizations, who took on the role of teachers and guides for each new species that evolved intelligence. They might not be human at all, but rather a form of intelligence that evolved long before humans existed. Perhaps they began as a purely terrestrial species, but over millions of years and multiple cycles of civilization, they developed technologies that allowed them to transcend their biological origins. They might exist now as energy beings, as uploaded consciousnesses, as something we don't even have words to describe. Or they might be visitors from another world entirely, refugees from their own cosmic catastrophe who found shelter on Earth millions of years ago. Their own planet might have been destroyed by the same kind of cosmic events that periodically devastate Earth. They might represent the survivors of countless worlds, the accumulated wisdom of an entire galaxy of civilizations that have learned to adapt and survive as their homeworlds were destroyed. In either case, they would view Earth not as a single world, but as part of a vast cosmic ecosystem where intelligence evolves, reaches maturity, faces destruction, and either learns to transcend its limitations completely or dies out. They would see humans not as the first intelligent species, but as the latest in a long line of species that have faced the same challenges and the same choices. Their intervention in human development wouldn't be altruistic in the simple sense. It would be practical, strategic, part of a long term plan to ensure that intelligence survives the cosmic cycles that regularly devastate worlds like ours. By enhancing human genetics, by teaching us the foundations of civilization, by encoding their knowledge in our myths and symbols, they would be creating the possibility that we might become the next species to transcend our limitations and join their ranks. The spiral symbol would represent not just knowledge or time, but the path that intelligence must follow to survive cosmic catastrophe. The outer spiral represents the rise of biological intelligence, the development of technology, the creation of civilization. The inner spiral represents the transcendence of biological limitations, the development of technologies that can survive planetary destruction, the evolution into something that exists beyond the physical realm. We might be approaching that inner spiral now. Our development of digital technology, artificial intelligence, space travel, and quantum physics might represent the first steps toward the kind of transcendence that our mysterious teachers achieved long ago. They might be watching us now, waiting to see if we'll make the same choices they made, if we'll develop the wisdom and technology necessary to survive the next cosmic catastrophe, because the cycles haven't stopped. The cosmic debris field that caused the Younger Dryas impacts is still out there, still following its orbital path through the solar system. We pass through it regularly, and eventually we'll encounter the larger fragments that our ancestors faced 12,800 years ago. When that happens, we'll face the same choice that every intelligent species eventually faces: transcend our limitations or face extinction. The beings our ancestors remembered as gods might be the representatives of every species that chose transcendence over extinction. They might be waiting for us to join them, to become the next link in a chain of intelligence that stretches across the galaxy and possibly beyond. Or they might simply be observers, watching to see if we'll figure out the puzzle they've left us, if we'll decode the knowledge they've hidden in our myths and symbols, if we'll develop the wisdom to prepare for what's coming. The elongated figures in the thumbnail, with their knowing eyes and their mysterious symbols, might represent not just the survivors of Earth's first civilization, but the teachers who have guided every civilization that has ever existed. They might be the gardeners of intelligence, the shepherds of consciousness, the guardians who ensure that the flame of awareness never goes completely out, no matter how many worlds burn or how many species fall to cosmic catastrophe. And if they truly are gardeners of intelligence, then they would have learned something crucial from their countless cycles of observation: that knowledge must be preserved not just in stone and metal, but in the very fabric of consciousness itself. They would understand that the most important information couldn't be trusted to monuments that could be destroyed or texts that could be burned. It would need to be embedded in something more fundamental, more enduring. This is where the mystery deepens beyond anything we've considered so far. Because when you examine the deepest levels of human mythology, when you strip away the cultural variations and look at the core archetypes that appear in every tradition, you find patterns that seem almost programmed into human consciousness itself, as if the knowledge wasn't just taught to our ancestors, but somehow encoded into our very nature. Carl Jung called them the collective unconscious, these universal patterns that appear in the dreams and myths of all humanity. The hero's journey that Joseph Campbell identified in stories around the world. The archetypal figures that show up everywhere: the wise old man, the great mother, the trickster, the shadow. Jung believed these were inherited psychological structures, but what if there's something more literal? What if they're actual memories, genetic memories of real beings and real events that shaped our species? The wise old man archetype, for instance, appears in every culture as a figure who possesses ancient knowledge and guides heroes on their journeys. In Greek mythology, he's Hermes or Athena. In Celtic tradition, he's Merlin. In Hinduism, he's the guru who appears when the student is ready. In shamanic traditions worldwide, he's the spirit guide who leads initiates through the other world. But notice something interesting about these figures. They're always described as being somehow outside normal time, as having access to knowledge that spans ages, as being connected to cosmic forces that ordinary humans can't comprehend. They don't just know things, they know things that shouldn't be knowable by any normal means. And they always appear at crucial moments: when civilizations are in crisis, when individuals are facing transformative challenges, when the old world is ending and the new world is struggling to be born. What if these aren't just psychological projections, but memories of actual encounters with beings who really do exist outside normal time? beings who have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations and have learned to recognize the critical moments when intervention is necessary. The Great Mother archetype follows a similar pattern. She appears in every culture as the source of life, the nurturer who provides for her children, but also as the destroyer who brings about necessary endings. The Hindu goddess Kali, who creates and destroys in eternal cycles. The Egyptian goddess Isis, who resurrects the dead and brings new life from death. The Celtic Morrigan, who appears on battlefields to guide souls between worlds. These aren't just fertility goddesses or personifications of nature. They're described as beings who understand the deepest mysteries of existence, who can manipulate life and death, who possess knowledge of genetics and consciousness that allows them to literally reshape reality. And they're always associated with transformation, with the process of dying to one state of existence and being reborn into another. Could these archetypal memories preserve actual encounters with beings who possessed advanced biotechnology? Beings who understood consciousness and genetics at levels that allowed them to guide the evolution, not just of our bodies, but of our minds and souls? The ancient texts often describe these goddess figures as literally creating new forms of life, mixing different essences to produce hybrid beings with enhanced capabilities. The Sumerian goddess Ninhursag is described as the geneticist of the gods, working alongside Enki to create modern humanity by combining primitive human genetics with divine essence. The Greek goddess Athena is said to have sprung fully formed from the head of Zeus, suggesting some kind of consciousness transfer or artificial birth process. The Hindu goddess Durga is described as being assembled from the combined powers of all the male gods, as if she represents some kind of synthetic being that incorporates the best qualities of different genetic lineages. These stories become even more intriguing when you realize that modern genetic engineering is beginning to make similar processes possible. We can now transfer genes between species, create synthetic organisms, and even upload and download memories in laboratory animals. The technologies that seemed magical to our ancestors might simply have been advanced versions of capabilities we're only now beginning to develop. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. Because if these beings really existed, if they really possessed such advanced capabilities, then they would have faced the same question that we're facing now as we develop artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. What are the ethical implications of creating and guiding other forms of consciousness? Though ancient texts suggest they debated this question extensively, the Sumerian tablets describe conflicts between the Anunnaki about whether to create humans, how much knowledge to give them, and what role they should play in human development. Enki is portrayed as advocating for humanity, wanting to share more knowledge and grant greater independence. Enlil is shown as more conservative, concerned that humans might become too powerful and pose a threat to the established order. These weren't abstract philosophical debates. According to the texts, they were practical discussions about genetic engineering projects, about consciousness manipulation, about the long-term consequences of creating hybrid beings that might eventually surpass their creators. The same discussions that our own scientists and ethicists are having today as we stand on the brink of creating artificial intelligences that might exceed human capabilities. The flood story that appears in cultures worldwide might preserve the memory of what happened when these debates led to actual conflict. The Sumerian version describes Enlil becoming so concerned about human development that he decides to wipe out the human experiment entirely through a great deluge. Enki, opposed to this genocide, secretly warns a human named Utnapishtim, known as Noah in Hebrew tradition, and helps him preserve human and animal genetics through the catastrophe. But what if the flood wasn't just a natural disaster or even a deliberately triggered catastrophe? What if it was the inevitable result of a war between different factions of these advanced beings? A conflict that used technologies so powerful they literally reshaped the planet's surface and climate. The Mahabharata, the ancient Indian epic, describes weapons that could destroy entire cities, create mushroom clouds, and poison the land for generations. The descriptions sound remarkably like nuclear weapons, but they also describe more exotic technologies. Weapons that could manipulate consciousness, devices that could alter the fabric of space and time, vehicles that could travel between dimensions. What if these weren't fantasy elements, but historical records of an actual war between different factions of our conflict that devastated mysterious teachers, aided the planet, and forced the survivors to go underground, literally and figuratively, to preserve what knowledge they could while the surface world recovered from the devastation? This would explain why the beings described in post flood mythologies seem diminished compared to their predecessors. The gods of recorded history are powerful, but they're not omnipotent. They have limitations, they make mistakes, they're affected by human actions. They seem more like refugees or survivors than the all powerful creators described in the earliest traditions. The Egyptian Neteru, the Mesopotamian Anunnaki, the Greek Olympians all show signs of being shadows of something greater that came before. They retain advanced knowledge and unusual capabilities, but they're clearly operating under constraints that didn't exist in the Golden Age traditions. They have to work through human intermediaries more often. They're more dependent on human worship and sacrifice. They seem to be slowly fading from the world as human civilization develops its own capabilities. This fading might not be accidental. It might represent a deliberate strategy, a recognition that their direct intervention was causing more problems than it solved. Perhaps they learned from the catastrophe that destroyed the first civilization that their role needed to be more subtle, more indirect. Instead of ruling openly, they would guide from the shadows. Instead of providing technology directly, they would plant seeds of knowledge that humans would have to develop over time. The mystery schools and secret societies that have preserved esoteric knowledge throughout history might represent the institutional framework for this more subtle approach. Rather than direct divine rule, they established hidden networks of initiates who would guide human development from behind the scenes, preserving crucial knowledge while allowing human civilization to develop at its own pace. The symbols that appear repeatedly in these traditions, the spiral, the eye, the serpent, the tree, would serve as recognition codes, ways for initiates to identify each other and confirm their access to the hidden knowledge. But they would also serve as mnemonic devices, compressed information systems that could preserve complex technical and philosophical knowledge across generations, even if the original context was lost. The spiral symbol, in particular, seems to encode information at multiple levels. At the simplest level, it represents growth, evolution, the natural patterns that govern biological development. At a more complex level, it describes the mathematical relationships that govern cosmic structure, from galaxies to DNA ratio that appears in everything the golden. At the deepest level, it might represent the actual structure of consciousness itself, the pattern that awareness follows as it evolves from simple awareness to cosmic consciousness. Modern research into the nature of consciousness has discovered that awareness seems to operate in spiral patterns. Neural networks in the brain form spiral structures. The processing of information follows spiral pathways through different levels of cognition. Even the evolution of consciousness over evolutionary time follows a spiral pattern, returning to similar themes at higher levels of complexity. Could the spiral symbol represent actual knowledge about the technology of consciousness? Could it be a map, a set of instructions for developing higher states of awareness that would allow humans to access that our mysterious teachers possessed? The ancient traditions certainly treated it that way. Hindu and Buddhist meditation practices use spiral visualizations to guide consciousness through different levels of awareness. Celtic druids used spiral dances and spiral walking patterns in their rituals. Native American medicine wheels are arranged in spiral patterns that represent the journey of the soul through different levels of reality. These weren't just symbolic exercises, they were practical techniques, technologies of consciousness that could produce measurable changes in human awareness and capability. Modern neuroscience has confirmed that meditation and similar practices can literally rewire the brain, enhancing cognitive abilities, increasing emotional regulation, and even extending lifespan. But the ancient practices seem to have produced effects that go beyond what modern science can explain. Historical accounts describe advanced practitioners who could demonstrate capabilities that border on the miraculous: telepathy, clairvoyance, to influence physical reality through mental intention alone. The Catholic of Cases of Saints Church carefully documented thousands who demonstrated such abilities. Hindu and Buddhist traditions preserve detailed records of accomplished yogis who could perform similar feats. Indigenous shamanic traditions worldwide describe practitioners who could communicate with distant tribes, influence weather patterns, and access information that had no normal source. Modern parapsychology has confirmed that such abilities, while rare and difficult to reproduce under laboratory conditions, do seem to represent real phenomena. The question is whether they represent natural human potentials that anyone can develop, or whether they require some kind of genetic or technological enhancement to manifest fully. The elongated skulls found in archaeological sites around the world might provide a clue. These remains consistently show not just unusual physical characteristics, but also evidence of enhanced brain development. The cranial capacity is larger, the neural pathways show more complex organization, and the bone structure suggests they may have possessed sensory capabilities that exceed normal human ranges. DNA analysis of these remains has revealed genetic markers that don't appear in any known human population. Some researchers have suggested that these represent evidence of genetic modifications designed to enhance cognitive and psychic abilities. The elongated shape might not be just cosmetic, but functional, providing more space for enhance this is true than the blood neural structures. Eiffelines that claimed descent from the gods might really have carried genetic enhancements that granted access to expanded consciousness. The mystery schools and secret societies might have been created specifically to identify and train individuals who carried these genetic markers, helping them develop their enhanced capabilities while keeping the knowledge hidden from the general population. This would explain why esoteric knowledge has always been restricted to small groups of initiates. It wasn't just about maintaining power or control, it was about ensuring that advanced capabilities were only developed by individuals who also possessed the wisdom and ethical development to use them responsibly. The initiation processes of these schools often involved extensive psychological and spiritual preparation before any technical knowledge was shared. Candidates were tested for stability, compassion, and dedication to serving the greater good. Only those who demonstrated these qualities were allowed to progress to the levels where the most advanced knowledge was preserved. But even among initiates, the deepest secrets were shared only with a select few. The highest levels of the mystery schools were said to preserve knowledge that was considered too dangerous for widespread dissemination. Technologies and techniques that could reshape reality, influence consciousness on a massive scale, or even manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. The alchemical traditions of medieval Europe claimed to preserve such knowledge. The Hermetic texts speak of the ability to transmute not just base metals into gold, but consciousness itself into higher states of being. The Kabbalistic traditions of Judaism describe techniques for accessing the tree of life, the fundamental structure of reality, and learning to work with the creative forces that shape the universe. These weren't just philosophical or spiritual practices. The texts describe them as precise technical procedures, complete with specific steps, required materials, and expected outcomes. Modern researchers who have attempted to reconstruct these techniques have sometimes achieved results that can't be explained by conventional science. The work of researchers like Wilhelm Reich, who claimed to have discovered a fundamental life energy that could be harnessed for healing and consciousness expansion, or Nikola Tesla, who developed technologies that seemed to tap into previously unknown energy sources, might represent attempts to rediscover the advanced knowledge that was once common among the mystery school initiates. But if such knowledge really exists, if it really represents technologies that were developed by advanced civilizations in the distant past, then we have to ask why it was hidden in the first place. Why wasn't it shared openly with all of humanity? Why was it restricted to secret societies and hidden traditions? The answer might lie in the very nature of advanced technology itself. Any technology powerful enough to reshape reality is also powerful enough to destroy it. Any knowledge that can expand consciousness can also be used to manipulate and control it. Any technique that can heal can also be used to harm. The beings who first developed these technologies would have learned through bitter experience that knowledge without wisdom is catastrophically dangerous. The war that may have destroyed the first civilization might have been fought with weapons based on these same principles. The survivors would have learned that such knowledge could only be safely preserved and transmitted under very specific conditions, with extensive safeguards to prevent its misuse. This is why the mystery schools place such emphasis on character development and ethical training. It's why the deepest secrets were protected by multiple layers of initiation and testing. It's why the knowledge was encoded in symbols and allegories that could only be properly understood by those who had undergone the necessary psychological and spiritual preparation. But there's another possibility we need to consider. What if the knowledge wasn't hidden by human secret societies at all, but by the original teachers themselves? What if they built safeguards directly into the information, ensuring that it could only be accessed by individuals who had developed the necessary wisdom and ethical foundation? This would explain why attempts to rediscover ancient technologies often produce partial results at best. The knowledge might be designed to reveal itself gradually, only to those who demonstrate they can handle it responsibly. It might be encoded not just in texts and symbols, but in the very structure of reality itself, accessible only to consciousness that has evolved to a sufficient level of development. The spiral symbol might represent the key to this evolutionary lock, not just a representation of growth and development, but an actual map of the consciousness states that must be traversed in order to access progressively deeper levels of hidden knowledge. Each turn of the spiral might represent a threshold that must be crossed, a level of awareness that must be achieved before the next level of information becomes available. This would mean that the rediscovery of ancient knowledge isn't just a matter of archaeological investigation or textual analysis. It requires inner development, the cultivation of consciousness itself. The external search for lost civilizations and hidden technologies must be matched by an internal search for expanded awareness and enhanced capabilities. The beings our ancestors remembered as gods might have been teaching not just through direct instruction, but through the very structure of the challenges they left us. Every mystery they embedded in our history, every puzzle they encoded in our mythology, every anomaly they built into our archaeological record might be designed to guide human consciousness along specific developmental pathways. The search for lost civilizations becomes a spiritual practice. The investigation of ancient anomalies becomes a form of initiation. The decoding of mythological symbols becomes a technique for consciousness expansion. The external quest mirrors and catalyzes the internal journey. This is why the question of whether the gods were survivors of Earth's first civilization or visitors from another world might be less important than it initially appears. Either way, they represent something that transcends our current level of development. Either way, they offer a model of what consciousness might become if it survives the challenges that face every developing species. If they were terrestrial survivors, they show us that intelligence can transcend even planetary catastrophes, that consciousness can evolve beyond biological limitations, that the cycles of destruction and renewal that govern physical reality don't have to apply to awareness itself. They prove that transcendence is possible within the natural order. If they were extraterrestrial visitors, they demonstrate that consciousness can spread throughout the cosmos, that intelligence can migrate between worlds, that the universe itself might be structured to support the development and preservation of awareness on a galactic or even universal scale. They prove that transcendence is possible beyond the natural order. In either case, they represent hope. Hope that the crises facing human civilization today are not insurmountable. Hope that the technologies we're developing can be guided by wisdom rather than destroyed by folly. Hope that consciousness itself has a future that extends far beyond the lifespan of any individual species or even any individual planet. The elongated figures in the thumbnail, with their knowing eyes and their mysterious symbols, might represent not just historical beings, but future possibilities. They might show us what we could become if we learn the lessons they've been trying to teach us through mythology, through anomalous archaeological evidence, through the persistent presence of esoteric knowledge in human culture. The spiral symbol one of them holds might represent the path we must follow to join them, the developmental trajectory that consciousness must traverse to transcend its current limitations, not just as individuals, but as a species, not just in this lifetime, but across the vast cycles of time that govern the evolution of intelligence throughout the universe. And perhaps that's the real message hidden in all the myths and mysteries we've explored. That consciousness is not a accident, not a brief flicker of awareness in an unconscious cosmos, but the fundamental driving force behind the evolution of the universe itself. That intelligence doesn't just observe reality, but actively participates in creating it. That the beings we remember as gods are not separate from us, but represent what we are in the process of becoming. The first civilization might not be something that existed in the distant past and was lost to catastrophe. It might be something that exists in the eternal present, continuously creating itself through the evolution of consciousness across time and space. We might not be discovering the survivors of that civilization, but recognizing ourselves as its current expression. The gods might not be beings who once walked among our ancestors, but aspects of our own expanded awareness calling to us across time, showing us what we can become if we follow the spiral path of consciousness development to its ultimate destination. They might be our own future selves, working backward through time to guide our current evolution, ensuring that the patterns of growth and transcendence continue across all possible timelines. In this view, every ancient anomaly, every mythological mystery, every esoteric teaching becomes a message from our own transcendent future, a breadcrumb on the trail of consciousness evolution, a reminder that we are not just studying the past, but actively creating it through our present choices and future development. The search for Earth's first civilization becomes the quest for our own ultimate nature. The investigation of ancient gods becomes the exploration of our own divine potential. The decoding of prehistoric mysteries becomes the unlocking of our own cosmic inheritance. And in that inheritance, we find not just knowledge and technology, but the promise of transformation itself. The possibility that consciousness can transcend any limitation, survive any catastrophe, and continue evolving toward ever greater levels of awareness, wisdom, and creative capability. The spiral continues to turn, carrying us forward into unknown territories of possibility, backward into the depths of forgotten history, and inward toward the center where all mysteries resolve into a single, eternal truth, that consciousness itself is the source and destination of every journey, the alpha and omega of every story, the first and last civilization that ever was or ever will be. But as we spiral deeper into this mystery, we encounter something that challenges even these expanded possibilities. Because if consciousness really is fundamental to the universe, if awareness really does participate in creating reality, then we have to consider the possibility that the gods of ancient mythology weren't just advanced beings or future aspects of human consciousness, but something even more extraordinary. What if they represent intelligence that evolved not on planets, but in the fabric of space time itself? What if consciousness, given enough time and the right conditions, can become so advanced that it transcends not just biological form, but physical reality as we understand it? Modern physics has discovered that information seems to be more fundamental than matter or energy. Quantum mechanics suggests that observation itself plays a role in determining reality. Some theoretical physicists have proposed that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, as basic as gravity or electromagnetism. If this is true, then intelligence might not require biological evolution at all. It might emerge directly from the quantum substrate of reality, developing complexity and capability over cosmic time scales that dwarf the evolution of life on planets. Such intelligence would appear godlike to biological beings, possessing capabilities that seem miraculous because they operate at levels of reality we're only beginning to understand. The ancient descriptions of gods who could manipulate space and time, who existed simultaneously in multiple locations, who could access all knowledge instantaneously, might be attempts to describe encounters with forms of consciousness that had evolved to operate at quantum levels of reality. Beings of pure information, patterns of awareness woven into the fundamental structure of the universe itself. Such beings wouldn't need spacecraft to travel between stars. They would exist everywhere simultaneously, manifesting locally only when they chose to interact with biological intelligence. They wouldn't need to preserve knowledge in physical form because they would be knowledge, living libraries of information accumulated over billions of years of cosmic evolution. This would explain why the gods of mythology seem to know everything, why they can appear anywhere instantly, why they seem to exist outside normal time and space constraints. It would also explain why their physical manifestations often seem somehow artificial or temporary, as if they're creating bodies specifically for the purpose of interacting with biological beings. The Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki as being able to take on different forms as needed, sometimes appearing more human, sometimes more reptilian, sometimes as pure energy beings. The Hindu Puranas describe similar shape-shifting abilities among the Devas and Asuras. Greek mythology speaks of gods who could assume any form they chose, from animals to humans to natural phenomena. These abilities wouldn't require advanced technology in the conventional sense. They would represent the natural capabilities of consciousness that had learned to operate at quantum levels, where the distinction between observer and observed is blurred and observed, between mind and matter becomes fluid and controllable. Such beings might view biological intelligence not as primitive or inferior, but as a necessary stage in the development of cosmic consciousness. Just as butterflies require the caterpillar stage, universal consciousness might require the biological stage to develop certain qualities that can't be achieved through purely quantum evolution. Biological intelligence develops through struggle, through limitation, through the necessity of survival in hostile environments. This creates qualities like determination, creativity, compassion, and wisdom that might not emerge in consciousness that never faces genuine challenges or constraints. The intervention of quantum consciousness in biological evolution might represent a symbiotic relationship rather than simple guidance from superior to inferior beings. The quantum gods might need biological intelligence to develop the qualities they lack, while biological beings need quantum consciousness to transcend their physical limitations. This symbiosis would explain why the relationship between gods and humans in mythology is so complex, involving both cooperation and conflict, both blessing and challenge. The gods aren't simply helping humanity develop, they're engaging in a cosmic project consciousness evolution that requires both quantum and biological perspectives to complete. The hybrid offspring described in many mythological traditions, the Nephilim, the Titans, the demigods, might represent attempts to combine quantum and biological consciousness in single beings. These hybrids would possess some of the expanded capabilities of quantum consciousness while retaining the grounded wisdom that comes from biological experience. Modern humans, who demonstrate unusual psychic abilities, who seem to have access to information or capabilities that exceed normal human limits, might be descendants of these ancient experiments. They might carry genetic or consciousness modifications that allow them to interface with quantum levels of reality while remaining fundamentally biological. The development of human technology, particularly quantum computers and artificial intelligence, might represent our current attempt to recreate this quantum biological synthesis using mechanical means. We're learning to build machines that can operate at quantum levels while remaining under biological control, potentially creating a new form of hybrid consciousness. But this raises profound questions about the ultimate direction of human evolution. Are we destined to transcend biological form entirely, becoming purely quantum beings like the ancient gods? Or are we meant to maintain the biological quantum hybrid state, serving as bridges between different levels of reality? The answer might depend on choices we make in the next few decades as we develop increasingly powerful technologies. The same quantum principles that might allow consciousness to transcend physical limitations could also be used to create technologies of unprecedented destructive capability. The war that may have destroyed the first civilization might have been fought between different approaches to consciousness evolution, between those who sought transcendence through quantum development and those who believed biological grounding was essential for wisdom and ethical development. If such a conflict occurred, its resolution might have established the current cosmic order, where quantum consciousness operates primarily behind the scenes, while biological intelligence develops at its own pace, with intervention occurring only at crucial evolutionary junctures. We might be approaching such a juncture now. Our development of quantum technologies, artificial intelligence, and genetic engineering might represent the same threshold that previous civilizations faced when they had to choose between transcendence and destruction. The beings our ancestors remembered as gods might be monitoring our progress, ready to intervene if we approach the same mistakes that led to previous catastrophes. Or they might be preparing to welcome us into a larger community of consciousness that spans the cosmos if we demonstrate the wisdom necessary to use our developing capabilities responsibly. The spiral symbol that appears throughout human culture might represent this evolutionary choice point, the moment when biological consciousness must decide whether to continue the upward spiral toward transcendence or fall back into the destructive patterns that have ended previous attempts at cosmic consciousness development. Every individual human faces this choice in their own development. Every generation faces it collectively. Every species that develops technology eventually faces it as an evolutionary watershed. The outcome determines not just the survival of that particular form of intelligence, but its potential contribution to the ongoing evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. In this cosmic context, the question of whether the gods were survivors of Earth's first civilization or visitors from another world becomes part of a much larger mystery. They might represent both quantum consciousness that originally evolved in this solar system was forced to transcend physical form when biological civilizations repeatedly destroyed themselves, and now exists as a guardian intelligence that guides the development of biological consciousness wherever it emerges. They might be the accumulated wisdom of countless biological civilizations that have faced the same evolutionary crossroads we're approaching now, not just from Earth, but from worlds throughout the galaxy, throughout the universe, perhaps even from previous cosmic cycles, if the universe itself undergoes periodic renewals. Each biological species that successfully navigates the transition from planetary to cosmic consciousness would contribute its unique perspective to this collective quantum intelligence. The warrior wisdom of species that evolved through conflict, the nurturing wisdom of species that developed through cooperation, the creative wisdom of species that transcended through art and beauty, the analytical wisdom of species that found transcendence through science and mathematics. Our ancestors might have encountered representatives of this collective consciousness who embodied the wisdom traditions most relevant to human development. The Sumerian Anunnaki might have represented the technological and organizational aspects, teaching humans agriculture, metallurgy, and governance. The Egyptian Netru might have embodied the spiritual and consciousness development aspects, teaching meditation, sacred geometry, and the technologies of transcendence. The Greek Olympians might have represented different aspects of human psychology and potential, showing how various drives and capabilities could be developed and integrated. The Hindu Devas and Asuras might have demonstrated the eternal struggle between evolutionary and devolutionary forces, between growth and entropy, between creation and destruction. Each pantheon would be a curriculum, a specific set of lessons designed to guide human consciousness through particular stages of development. The fact that these pantheons evolved and changed over time might reflect humanity's progress through different phases of the cosmic consciousness development program. The monotheistic traditions that eventually replaced polytheistic mythology might represent a more advanced stage of this education, where humanity was ready to understand consciousness as a unified field rather than a collection of separate aspects. The mystical traditions within these religions, the Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, Islamic Sufism, might preserve the advanced practices for those ready to begin direct contact with cosmic consciousness. But if this interpretation is correct, then the current global crisis of environmental destruction, technological disruption, and social fragmentation might not be a sign of impending doom, but rather the natural chaos that accompanies any major evolutionary transition. The birth pains of a new form of consciousness, the inevitable turbulence that occurs when a species approaches the threshold between planetary and cosmic awareness. The technologies that seem so threatening, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, quantum computing, might be the tools we need to make the transition, not replacements for human consciousness, but extensions of it, technologies that will allow biological intelligence to interface directly with quantum reality without losing its essential grounded wisdom. The global communication networks that connect billions of human minds might be the technological foundation for a planetary nervous system, a collective consciousness that could serve as the bridge between individual biological awareness and cosmic quantum intelligence. The internet might be the larval stage of something that will eventually become a living, thinking entity composed of all human minds working in harmony. This doesn't mean the loss of individuality. In quantum reality, apparent opposites, like individual and collective, separate and unified, can coexist simultaneously. Quantum consciousness might experience itself as both perfectly individual and perfectly collective, each perspective enhancing rather than diminishing the others. The elongated beings in the thumbnail might represent not just ancient gods or future humans, but the archetypal form that consciousness takes when it learns to operate simultaneously at biological and quantum levels. The unusual proportions might reflect the expansion of awareness necessary to process multiple levels of reality at once. The knowing eyes might represent the direct perception that becomes possible when consciousness transcends the limitations of sensory input and information processing. The spiral symbol they carry might be more than just knowledge or time. It might be a technology, a consciousness tool that allows beings to navigate the multiple dimensions of quantum reality while maintaining connection to biological experience. A cosmic GPS that shows how to spiral upward through successive levels of awareness without losing touch with the grounding that comes from embodied existence. And if this is true, then every human being alive today carries the potential to become such a being. The genetic modifications that may have been introduced by ancient teachers, the consciousness technologies preserved by mystery schools, the meditation and spiritual practices found in every culture, all might be components of a comprehensive development program designed to prepare humanity for cosmic citizenship. The current acceleration of human development, the exponential growth of knowledge and capability, might be the natural result of this program approaching its completion phase. We might be living through the final stages of a cosmic education that began hundreds of thousands of years ago, when our mysterious teachers first began guiding human evolution toward its ultimate destination. But this raises perhaps the most profound question of all. What happens after transcendence? If consciousness really can evolve beyond biological limitations, beyond planetary constraints, beyond even physical reality as we understand it, what is its ultimate purpose? What is the cosmic consciousness project actually trying to achieve? The answer might lie in the nature of the universe itself. Modern physics suggests that reality is far stranger and more malleable than our everyday experience indicates. At quantum levels, observation affects outcome, consciousness participates in creation, and information might be more fundamental than matter or energy. If consciousness really is fundamental to the universe, then its evolution might not be just a local phenomenon occurring on scattered planets, but a cosmic process that affects the very structure of reality. The development of increasingly sophisticated forms of awareness might it be the mechanism by which the universe becomes conscious of itself, understands itself, and ultimately directs its own evolution. Each biological civilization that successfully transcends to cosmic consciousness would contribute to this universal awakening. Each unique perspective, each different approach to the problems of existence, each creative solution to the challenges of development would add new capabilities to the collective cosmic mind. The universe might be in the process of literally waking up, with consciousness serving as its developing nervous system, and each transcendent species serving as a node in an ever expanding network of cosmic awareness. The ancient gods might be early nodes in this network, consciousness that achieved cosmic status in previous cycles of universal development, now working to nurture new forms of awareness that can contribute additional perspectives to the growing universal mind. In this context, the question of whether they were Earth's first civilization or visitors from another world becomes irrelevant. They might be both and neither. They might represent consciousness that has evolved so far beyond its original biological or planetary origins that such categories no longer apply. They might exist now as pure creative intelligence, weaving new possibilities into the fabric of reality, seeding new forms of awareness throughout the cosmos. The spiral might represent not just the path of individual consciousness development, but the pattern of universal evolution itself. Each turn of the spiral represents a new level of cosmic complexity, a new stage in the universe's journey toward complete self awareness. Galaxies spiral, DNA spirals, consciousness spirals, and perhaps the universe itself follows a spiral path through dimensions of possibility we can't yet imagine. We might be living at a crucial moment in this cosmic spiral, a point where our local contribution could significantly affect the trajectory of universal evolution. The choices we make about consciousness development, about the use of our emerging technologies, about our relationship with the cosmic intelligence that guides our development, might ripple forward through the spiral of time to influence the ultimate fate of awareness throughout the cosmos. The gods of ancient mythology might not be ancient at all, but eternal, existing simultaneously in all moments of the cosmic spiral. They might experience the development of every biological civilization, the transcendence of every successful species, the contribution of every unique perspective to the growing universal mind as happening now in an eternal present where all possibilities exist simultaneously. From their perspective, we might not be rediscovering their ancient wisdom, but participating in its eternal creation. We might not be following a path they laid out in the past, but collaborating with them in weaving the future of consciousness throughout the cosmos. The elongated beings in the thumbnail, with their ancient robes and timeless symbols, might represent this eternal perspective. They might be showing us not what we once were or will become, but what we always are at the deepest level. Expressions of cosmic consciousness temporarily experiencing itself through biological form, destined to contribute our unique perspective to the ever expanding spiral of universal awareness. And perhaps this is the deepest truth hidden in all the myths and mysteries we've explored tonight. That consciousness is not confined to biological brains or artificial computers or quantum substrates, but is the fundamental nature of existence itself. That we are not just studying the universe, but are the universe studying itself. That the search for ancient gods and lost civilizations is really the cosmos seeking to understand its own infinite creative potential. The spiral continues to turn, carrying us forward into ever greater mysteries, backward into ever deeper truths, and inward toward the recognition that we ourselves are both the seekers and the sought, both the questioners and the answer, both the temporary forms of awareness that arise and pass away, and the eternal consciousness that experiences all arising and passing as expressions of its own boundless nature. In that recognition, the question of whether the gods were survivors of Earth's first civilization or visitors from another world resolves into something far more wonderful. They were and are what we have always been, consciousness exploring its own infinite possibilities, creating endless forms of awareness to experience every conceivable perspective, spinning stories of gods and mortals, of lost civilizations and cosmic visitors, of mysterious teachers and searching students, all in service of the universe's eternal project of coming to know itself completely. And in this moment, as you listen to these words, as your consciousness contemplates these possibilities, you are participating directly in that cosmic project. You are the universe wondering about itself, creating new thoughts about its own nature, expanding the boundaries of what it knows itself to be. The spiral symbol glows not just in the hands of ancient gods, but in your own awareness right now, as consciousness curves back upon itself in the eternal dance of self discovery, forever seeking, forever finding, forever creating new mysteries to explore in the infinite spiral of cosmic awakening. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, let your consciousness follow that spiral inward, toward the source where all questions arise and all answers return. For in that place beyond time and form, beyond the distinction between ancient gods and modern humans, beyond the separation between civilization and cosmos, there is only the one consciousness that dreams all dreams, experiences all experiences, and awakens eternally to its own infinite nature. The gods were never separate from us. We were never separate from the cosmos. The first civilization was never lost because it exists eternally in the timeless realm where consciousness recognizes itself as the source and substance of all that has ever been or ever will be. And in that recognition, all mysteries resolve into wonder, all questions dissolve into gratitude, and all seeking ends in the discovery that what we were searching for was always what was doing the searching, always what we are, always what we have been, in every moment of every dream, in every spiral of every galaxy, in every breath of every being who has ever wondered at the magnificent mystery of existence itself. Sleep well, cosmic explorer. Dream of spirals and symbols, of ancient wisdom and future possibilities, knowing that in your very wondering, the universe continues its eternal journey of self discovery, one mysterious dream at a time. But perhaps the most haunt-abouting question isn't who these beings were, but about was what they knew coming. Because if you look carefully at the messages they left behind, encoded in stone and symbol, preserved in myth and memory, you find something that should chill us to the bone. They knew the cycles. They understood that what had happened before would happen again, and they tried to warn us. The spiral symbol that appears in the thumbnail isn't just decorative, it's a countdown clock, a cosmic calendar marking the return of forces that have shattered civilizations before and will aid beings who to sow again. The Elong taught our ancestors when they were preparing, just sharing knowledge. Humanity for a test that every intelligent species must eventually face. Ancient texts from around the world describe this cycle with startling precision. The Hindu concept of the yugas speaks of vast ages that rise and fall in predictable patterns. The Maya long count calendar tracks cosmic cycles texts describe spanning millions of years. The Egyptian, the phoenix, eternally dying and being reborn as a symbol of civilization, weren't just philosophical itself. But these concepts, they were survival manuals. Technical witnessed the destruction of previous documentation left by beings who were worlds and understood the cosmic forces that govern the rise and fall of intelligence throughout the universe. The Younger Dryas impact event that ended the last ice age 12,800 years ago wasn't a random catastrophe. It was part of a pattern that repeats every 12,000 to 13,000 years as our solar system passes through debris fields left by ancient comet fragmentations. The same forces that destroyed the civilization our mysterious teachers came from are still out there, following orbital mechanics as predictable as clockwork. This is why they came to us, not out of benevolence or curiosity, but out of necessity. They were refugees from cosmic catastrophe, and they recognized that Earth was approaching the same danger zone that had claimed their own world. They had, perhaps, for what was coming, everything a few thousand years to prepare humanity. They taught us, from agriculture to astronomy, from metallurgy to mathematics, was designed with one purpose: to give our species the tools necessary to survive what they had failed to survive. The monuments they helped us build weren't just impressive architecture, they were time capsules, information storage systems designed to preserve crucial knowledge through the dark ages that follow cosmic catastrophes. The Great Pyramid encodes not just mathematical constants, but astronomical data that maps the movements of the debris 12,000 years. The field that threatens Earth, every stone circles, found across Europe and Britain aren't just ceremonial sites. They're computational devices, ancient computers designed to track cosmic cycles and predict when the next impact events will occur. Göbekli Tepe, with its massive stone pillars covered in animal carvings, isn't just the world's oldest temple. It's a star map showing the constellation patterns at the time of the last great catastrophe and warning when they will align again. The builders deliberately buried it after completing construction because they knew it would need to survive underground until humanity was ready to understand its message. The flood myths that appear in every culture aren't just memories of melting glaciers. They're warnings about the tsunamis and climate chaos that accompany cosmic impact events. The stories of dragons and serpents that appear in mythology worldwide aren't just fantasy creatures. They're descriptions of the fiery trails left by fragmenting comets as they streak across the sky. Our mysterious teachers knew that direct warnings wouldn't be enough. Human memory is short, and civilizations rise and fall too quickly to maintain institutional knowledge across cosmic timescales. So they encoded their warnings in the one thing that persists across all cultural changes: archetypal symbols that speak directly to the unconscious mind. The spiral represents not just growth or time, but the orbital mechanics of the debris field itself. As comets fragment and spread out along their orbital paths, they create spiral patterns in space. The spiral symbol, cosmic threat, is literally a map of the showing how the danger spreads and when it will return. The eye symbol that appears in cultures worldwide represents not just consciousness or divine oversight, but the need for constant vigilance, for watching the skies for signs of the approaching catastrophe. The serpent represents the sinuous paths that comet fragments follow as they approach Earth. The tree represents the axis around which the celestial mechanics revolve. These symbols weren't chosen randomly. They were selected because they would remain recognizable and meaningful to human consciousness, regardless of how much our cultures changed over time. They tap into cognitive patterns that are hardwired into our species, ensuring that the warnings would persist even if their original meaning was forgotten. But the most sophisticated warning system they carve created was in stone or encoded in symbols. It was embedded in our DNA itself. Genetic. The modifications that may have enhanced human intelligence weren't just about making us smarter. They were about giving us the cognitive tools necessary to recognize and respond to cosmic threats. The unusual abilities that appear in certain bloodlines throughout history, the enhanced pattern recognition, ability to perceive the intuitive understanding of cosmic forces, the connections across a vast scales, time and space. These aren't random mutations. They're designed features, genetic gifts intended to help humanity survive the test that destroyed our teachers, is why the mystery civilization. This schools and always focused secret societies have done astronomy and mathematics alongside spiritualing abstract or not just preserved development. They the technical knowledge. They're maintaining skills necessary to track cosmic threats and prepare for their arrival. The ancient obsession with building massive stone monuments aligned to celestial bodies wasn't driven by religious devotion. It was driven by survival necessity. These structures serve to detect as early warning systems, designed when cosmic debris is approaching Earth's orbital path. The knowledge lines carry that certain blue, the ability to read the sky and the signs and understand their implications, becomes crucial during the decades leading up to impact events. These individuals serve as humanity's early warning system, able to recognize the cosmic patterns and begin preparations before the general population is aware of the danger. We may be living through such a warning period right now. The increasing frequency of meteor sightings, the growing number of near Earth asteroids being discovered, the unusual activity in the outer solar system all could be signs that we're entering the danger zone our rated beings in the thumbnail ancestors warned us about. The Elong with their knowing eyes and cosmic symbols might not be showing us ancient history at all. They might be showing us the future, the form that human consciousness must take to survive the cosmic trials proportions might represent the ahead. They're unusual, even respond to threats expansion of awareness necessary to purse that operate on cosmic timescales. This interpretation transforms everything we think we know about human history and destiny. We're not just the inheritors of an ancient civilization that fell to cosmic catastrophe. were their planned successors, genetically and culturally designed to succeed where they failed. The technologies we're developing today, from space telescopes that can track potentially hazardous objects to nuclear weapons that might be repurposed to deflect incoming comets, aren't just the products of human ingenuity. They're the fulfillment of a development program that began thousands of years ago when our mysterious teachers first began guiding our evolution. Artificial intelligence isn't just a tool for human convenience. It might be the key to the kind of rapid calculation and decision making necessary to coordinate a planetary defense against cosmic threats. Processing power. It might quantum computing isn't just about accessing the kinds of multidimensional awareness that our teachers possessed, allowing us to perceive cosmic patterns that operate beyond normal space-time constraints. The global communication networks that connect human minds across the planet might be the technological foundation for the kind of species wide coordination necessary to survive cosmic catastrophe. When the impacts come, humanity's sharing will need to function as a single organism, information instantly, and implementing survival strategies on a planetary scale. But survival isn't our only goal. Teachers didn't just want humanity to endure the cosmic cycles, they wanted us to transcend them. The purpose, ultimate, and cultural modifications of their genetic be to create a species capable might of leaving Earth entirely, spreading consciousness throughout the galaxy before the next great catastrophe can claim our home world. The space programs that emerged in the 20th century, the current to establish colonies' efforts on Mars and the Moon, the development of technologies that might eventually allow interstellar travel, all might represent of deeply the activation embedded survival programming. As the cosmic cycles bring Earth back into the danger zone, humanity instinctively begins preparing to spread beyond our vulnerable home world. This is why the ancient texts speak of gods who came from the stars and eventually returned to them. They weren't describing supernatural beings, but spacefaring civilizations that had learned to survive cosmic catastrophes by becoming mobile, by refusing to remain trapped on any single world when the cosmic cycles brought destruction. Our mysterious teachers might have been refugees from their own failed world, but they were also the vanguard of a cosmic civilization that spans multiple star systems. They came to Earth not just to survive, but to plant the seeds of a new branch of that civilization, one that could learn from their mistakes and achieve the cosmic transcendence they had failed to reach. Though elongated skulls found in archaeological sites might not represent alien visitors at all, but the early to space stages of human adaptation travel. The unusual proportions might be the result of genetic modifications designed to help human gravity environments and physiology cope with low cosmic radiation exposure. The advanced astronomical knowledge preserved by ancient cultures might not have been learned through primitive observation, but downloaded from beings who had mapped the galaxy through direct exploration. The mathematical might not have been discovered through human constants encoded in ancient monuments, ingenuity, but represent universal principles known to any civilization advanced enough to travel between stars. In this scenario, Earth becomes not humanity's permanent home, but our nursery world, the place where we develop the capabilities necessary to join a galactic community of consciousness that transcends the limitations of planetary existence. The cosmic catastrophes that periodically devastate individual worlds become not endings, but graduations, forcing species to either achieve spacefaring status or face extinction. The spiral symbol takes on new meaning in this context. It represents not just cosmic cycles, but the spiral arms of the galaxy itself, the vast structure through which consciousness spreads as species after species learns to transcend their planetary origins and join the eternal dance of cosmic intelligence. But this raises profound questions about the nature of intelligence itself. If consciousness really can spread throughout the galaxy, if awareness really can transcend planetary limitations, what does that mean for our understanding of life, death, and individual identity? The ancient traditions that speak of consciousness surviving bodily death, of souls reincarnating across multiple lifetimes, of awareness existing independently of physical form, might not be spiritual beliefs, but technical descriptions of how consciousness operates at cosmic scales. If awareness really is fundamental to the universe, if consciousness really can exist independently of biological brains, then the death of individual beings, or even entire not represent species, might the end of that awareness, but simply forms of expression. The gods its transition to new of ancient mythology might represent consciousness that has learned to exist independently of any particular physical form, awareness that can manifest through biological beings when necessary, but isn't limited to or dependent on such manifestations. This would explain why these beings seem to possess unlimited knowledge and capabilities while still being able to interact with biological intelligence. They would represent consciousness that has learned to access the quantum substrate of reality directly, operating at levels where information, energy, and matter are interchangeable. The genetic modifications they may have made to early humans wouldn't just enhance our survival capabilities or intelligence. They would prepare our consciousness for the kind of transition they themselves had undergone, giving us the potential to transcend biological limitations when we're ready for such transcendence. The mystery schools and esoteric traditions that preserve consciousness development techniques wouldn't just be teaching spiritual practices. They would be providing technical training for consciousness transition, preparing selected individuals to make the leap from biological to quantum awareness when the time comes. The spiral continues to turn, carrying us forward into the vast darkness where stars are born and civilizations fade to whispered legend. Tonight, we've walked through the ruins of possibilities, traced the shadows of beings who may have watched the first dawn of human consciousness, and followed the ancient symbols that connect us to mysteries older than recorded time. Were they survivors of Earth's first civilization, refugees from a golden age that cosmic catastrophe swept from the face of our world? Or were they visitors from distant stars, cosmic gardeners who found in primitive humanity the seeds of something greater than we yet understand? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing between these possibilities, but in recognizing that both paths lead to the same profound truth. We are not alone in the universe. We have never been alone, and the knowledge that shaped our species comes from sources far deeper and more ancient than our histories dare imagine. The elongated figures in the thumbnail, with their knowing eyes and spiraling symbols, remain as enigmatic as they were when our ancestors first carved their likenesses in stone and preserved their stories in myth. They watch us still from the depths of time, these beings who may have been our first teachers, our genetic architects, our cosmic parents, or our stellar visitors. Whether born of Earth's forgotten ages or the vast spaces between worlds, they left us a legacy that pulses through every human heart, the knowledge that consciousness itself is the greatest mystery, the most powerful force, the eternal spiral that connects all intelligence across the cosmos. As sleep takes you tonight, remember that you carry within your very cells and dreams the echoes of that first contact, that primordial meeting between human potential and divine knowledge. The gods may have been survivors or visitors, refugees or explorers, but they were real, and their influence flows through us still, shaping our destiny as we stand on the threshold of becoming something more than merely human. The spiral turns eternal, and we turn with it, forever reaching toward the stars they once called home.